Hey everyone. This week's Friday reflection is the relationship between hidden company value and who buys the coffee. It's one I've seen play out over and over again, and two examples came up this week. One was a couple of guys who decided to buy coffee for their team, a small group of a dozen people. One of the guys has been with the company a few years, another one, this is his first year. They both came in with a dozen donuts for 12 people. And it was one of those weird interactions where the overwhelming generosity led to way too many donuts for a dozen people. And it was one of those examples of how much these two people want to, as well as the rest of the team, work together. And they just didn't think about communicating. And it was the donuts that kind of brought it to the surface about how we need to communicate a little bit more, and welcoming someone into the tradition of the family company and someone who knows the tradition very well. And it was just that unconnected or disconnected, if you will, recognition of the tradition and who's going to buy the donuts, to bring people together into this tradition of service, and how much people really did want to work together to create more value as a team and do very well as they served their clients beyond the company. And so it was that subtle recognition of how we need to communicate a little bit more about some of those little things, like who buys the donuts, or I just thought I'd buy donuts this weekend, outside of the tradition that older veteran employee knows this is what we do on the second Friday of every month, or whatever it might be. It was a little bit more communication to welcome that person into the tradition. And you may have seen it in many cases where, you got people who have some of that subject matter expertise, the licenses, whatever it is. In this case, these are two guys that work in a mechanical service background. So, that kind of learning by doing experience means a lot. And some of that learning happens on their own as they work on individual projects and serve clients. And they haven't had the opportunity to formally come together and develop that communication as a whole team. And it was something as simple as buying donuts that actually raised that awareness among people. And so what came out of it? What's the company value of it? Because that's really what matters. It isn't just about the donuts. What came out of it was how they can organize their own little Friday forums as a team, and talk as much about what's going to happen next week, and even some of those little ideas like who's going to buy the donuts, or here's something I learned that I thought was really interesting and I didn't expect to learn it, or maybe a customer, like one of those great customers like I learned from, a customer named Hope, who said, hey, this is probably a better way to do this. You could help me out in a way that you kind of been missing. I didn't say anything before. I'm going to say it now. And those little Friday reflections among the team to reflect on what they learned this week, and then talk about something that may be coming up, if they're aware of it, in the following week, to offer some guidance to people and bring it together so they do know who's buying the donuts or who's going to buy donuts next week. The second example was one about who's going to buy the coffee. And this is something that if you've been in a startup company and maybe you've got one of those Keurig machines, and they're kind of expensive, and then when those K-cups get a little bit low, someone says, hey, I wonder who's going to buy the coffee. Oh, I think the founder should buy, it's his company, whatever. So let's make Tom buy the K-cups. I always brought my own cup of coffee to work because I wasn't working for the family company to drink the coffee. I was interested in working with people and building more value together, and I still am today, so I still bring my own coffee. But that idea of who's buying the coffee is whether it's a startup or whether it's one that kind of feels like a startup, again, for those new people unfamiliar with the tradition or how things work, who's buying the coffee? It isn't really about the coffee. It's about how we act as owners of this company, and especially people, again, who are not familiar with the tradition, or maybe are so familiar with it, they just expect things to be the same. And the conversation about who buys the coffee starts to initiate, as it did this week, how are we actually teaching each other the traditions of our company? And by the way, is it really about coffee? Is it really about more of our customer experience that we should be showing each other? Instead of worrying about who buys the coffee, let's just bring our own coffee, and more so, let's help each other to understand how we get things done together, rather than worrying about how low the K-cups are. Because what I found is a lot of those conversations that could be happening over coffee are not happening, and it's because of that distraction of who's behind the K-cups. So have the conversation about whatever this coffee is, whether it's those single shots or whether it's a pot of coffee, or more importantly, help frame up those Friday forum conversations for even the smaller groups, to help people bring it together and understand what it is, so it isn't just about whose coffee belongs to or who's bringing their own coffee, but more so, what are the traditions here and how are we going to get this done today, and what are those things about some of those client reflections. In this case, with who's buying the coffee, we ended up digging up something about the conversation you might be dealing with in terms of the ongoing relationships, and maybe moving into a service contract conversation as opposed to those individual one-off jobs, and developing that more valuable relationship for the customer and a more continuous kind of experience for people. And what came up this week was how uncomfortable people are who are used to just doing the job and closing the book on that conversation and that deal or that job today, as opposed to inviting and even engaging in the conversation about what does the relationship conversation look like. You can think of it in a tangible way, like, a plumbing company. If they've got those service contracts, and it's as much about scheduling the proactive kind of work as it is showing up when there's a problem. Many people, what I've learned in these Friday Forum conversations, haven't talked about how uncomfortable they are about engaging a new customer or an existing one to say, here's an offer we have to make your life easier and make it more predictable. And when they engage with you about what does it look like, how does it work, you're related to the experience you've already shared with them, and relate to other experiences with people like them. And you bring this together as a shared story, kind of like sharing those donuts with the other guys. So 2 examples of Friday Forum. Doesn't have to be a big deal, especially not looking at just like the peer advisory from the higher level people or that founder kind of a thing. Bringing that kind of experience right down to the people who are hands on the work to be done, boots on the ground. That same peer advisory experience, not a big deal, sometimes 15 minutes or less, reflecting on what happened during the week, talking about what's coming up next, and sharing some of those traditions of how to engage with that client named Hope or that client named Peter who wants to work with you and isn't quite sure how that works, and relating each other's stories and experiences from what they've learned over the tradition and how to engage people better to know who's buying the donuts in the company and how you can sell a better experience out there in the customer marketplace, whatever it might be for you. So bring it together with Friday Forums, help guide those people, give them the playbook to reflect on the week and make sure they know what's happening in the next week, and share those best practices so everybody can learn the same story together. Talk to you next week. Thanks.